This is the EWN Podcast Network.
Welcome to Prime Spark, the podcast that brings you conversations that inspire, celebrate, and empower women over 55. The second women's revolution is here, and it is time for us to fuel a spark that will ignite your way forward, illuminate your path, and reflect your gifts in the world. Now, here is your host for Prime Spark, Sarah Hart.
Hi, and welcome to Prime Spark. I'm Sarah Hart, and I'm so happy you're here. Prime Spark is designed for women over 55 to help us all have our happiest, most fulfilling, and successful lives now and in the future. The mission of Prime Spark is to change the way our society sees and treats older women. That's a big mission, which only means we all need to be involved. And we need to get started now. And today I have the great pleasure of speaking with Jeanette Leardi, a woman whose work I greatly admire. Jeanette Leardi is a social gerontologist, community educator, writer, editor, and public speaker, and aging wellness leader who has a passion for older adult empowerment and finds special personal fulfillment helping boomers and older generations identify and share their wisdom with others. Her decade of experiences as the primary caregiver to both of her parents inspired her encore career goals of changing perceptions about the aging process and helping people appreciate elders' inherent dignity, wisdom, and unique value as mentors and catalysts for social change. She accomplishes this through her publications and successful presentations and classes in journaling, spiritual writing, memoir writing, brain fitness, health literacy, ageism, intergenerational communication, creativity, and caregiver support to people of all ages. Jeanette's publishing experiences include positions at Newsweek, Life, People, Condé Nast Traveler, Sesame Street magazines, and the Charlotte Observer. She has a master's degree with honors in English from Rutgers University and a graduate certificate in gerontology from the University of North Carolina at Charlotte. Welcome, Jeanette. I'm so happy you're here today.
Oh, thank you so much, Sarah. It's a pleasure to be with you.
So in getting started, let me just ask you, do you experience getting older? And if so, what is that experience? And if not, why do you think it is that you don't?
Well, I would say, of course, I experience getting older. I would be surprised if there's anyone out there who doesn't experience getting older, because we start getting older from the minute we're born or even before then. So, I mean, we should all be experiencing getting older. But I guess what I would interpret your question to mean getting up in years. And yes, I do experience getting up in years. I feel I have the combination of an awareness of my physical, financial, and social vulnerabilities as I get older, because in our society, our society does not support aging well into our years as it should. So I experience that kind of awareness. But I also simultaneously experience an elation about getting older. I just turned 70, and that I've just been so excited about turning 70. I can't explain why. But I just think I'm the best at a lot of things than I've ever been. And there are a lot of good things about getting older. I feel I'm more able to handle stress and change better. I have more motivation to help others. So I think that there are some real positives about getting older. And that's what I'm about, is telling people what those positives are about.
I love that, Jeanette. I have asked so many women that question. And I haven't kept track, but I would guess 95% say the same thing you said, that of course I'm aware of it. You know, there's some physical things and that. But I actually feel better than I've ever felt. I feel more able to do things and get out and be me and on and on and on and on. And so I think on the balance, most of us love it.
Yeah.
It's a wild ride at this time in life.
Well, and that being said, though, internally, I also simultaneously feel much like I did all my life. I mean, inside my head, my personality, I feel I'm the same person. My passions and preferences have continued, have stayed pretty much the same. My spiritual values pretty much have stayed the same and have matured. So what I've been on the inside, I feel has just withstood the test of time. So in some ways I feel, yes, I'm changing. And in other ways, I feel changeless, that I've always been the same person I am.
That's fascinating. I never really thought of it that way before, but I do too. And so when every once in a while, I mean, I love every birthday. I bring it on,
Good for you.
And every once in a while I would think, how did I get to be this old? But I think about, I feel like I did when I was 20, 30. I mean, I don't, for me, I don't feel any different. I just,
Right.
there's a meanness that I brought with me my whole life.
Right. And I think that's the thing that at least when I was young, I never assumed that would be the case. I always assumed that when people got old, they were very different people. They felt like they were very different people. So that's something that you can't really quite explain to people who are decades younger. They just have to experience it, that we are, in, as I said, some ways changing and in other ways pretty much the same. And I'm sure you're familiar with psychologist Becca Levy from Yale, her studies about positive feelings about aging. If you have a positive sense of aging, you can actually increase your longevity on an average of 7.5 years, and you can help to avoid the pitfalls of dementia by about 50%. So there's some real science behind this U curve of happiness, where you get happier the older you get. And if we can have these positive views of aging, that's a health benefit as well as, an emotional benefit.
Absolutely. I don't know how many people, since I've read that book, which is, everybody should get the book. It's
Yes.
Breaking the Age Code.
Yes.
You need to get that book. It is brilliant. And since I've read it and told people those statistics, they don't believe it. I say, okay, go to the book, because she's a solid scientist. She's, I'm not making, this is not woo woo. I'm not making this up, go read it. So that was really, Jeanette, what you were talking about, not knowing until you get to this age about what it's like. But you have done some really interesting writing about the importance of intergenerational communication. So can you talk about that a bit? Because I think that's so important.
One of the things I wrestle with, and I'm trying to figure out a way of writing about this. I keep a blog called Ageful Living, and I've written blog posts about generations. And I think I used to subscribe to this older sense of that generations are discrete groups of people. The more I learn, and I'm still learning, thank goodness, we should all be still learning. The more I learn, the more I realize that talking about generations as generations may not be as valid as we once thought, that there are great variations within generations, and that I'm a baby boomer, and baby boomers can feel like they have other things in common with people decades younger than them or decades older. So when it comes to intergenerational communication, I think the first thing we need to do is kind of divest ourselves from the idea that generations are discretely different, that a typical millennial is this, and a typical Gen X is that, and a typical baby boomer. I don't think there are really any typicals anymore. I think and that can be a real positive way of communicating with people of different generations, is realizing that we can be more alike than we think we're different from one another. I mean, in the workplace, they talk about how millennials feel certain ways and baby boomers feel other ways. I don't think so. I think all people who want to have a good experience at work want to do a good job. They want to be recognized for doing a good job. They enjoy flexibility in their lifestyle. They want to have options offered to them. They want challenge and variety. I don't think those are generational differences. So the more I I think about intergenerational communication, the more I'm now siding with, we all basically talk the same language. We may couch it in different terms or make different assumptions of the other person, but we need to be breaking down those barriers. And once we break down those barriers of assumptions of what a boomer is like or what a Gen X or a millennial is like, we can then start to communicate in much more fluid and meaningful ways. So I'm not sure if I answered your question, but
yeah, you did. No, I got about 5 questions I want to ask you. I can't decide what to ask first. Because one of the things, but this is what's on top of my mind. It would be wonderful for you to write about intergenerational communication, but call it something else. And so we can stop using intergenerational, because once we say that, everybody thinks of this generation, this generation, this
right.
generation, this generation.
Right.
So think of a new word, Jeanette, and start writing about something that doesn't include that word, but embodies everything you were just saying. Because I think that one of the things that determines how we think about things is language.
Right.
And if we can have a new word for what we're talking about, or just talk about it without having any words. But it seems to me that it's a whole continuum. It's not little boxes of generations. It's a continuum. So do it. Please do it.
I want to thank you for just inspiring me, because as you were mentioning this, I was just making some notes. And what I was thinking of is when you said, call it something else, I'm just thinking of calling it universal language, just like we have the concept of universal design. When you have universal design, if you have a doorknob that an older person can open, you may have designed a doorknob that a woman or a man holding a young baby with one arm can also open,
right.
Or so it's something that will fit all people of all ages. So thank you for giving me that idea, and I'll ponder that a bit.
Oh, good. And now another thing I was thinking about, and I don't know if you had this on LinkedIn or if somebody else did, but it really made an impression on me. It was a picture of little kids going to school on the 100 day or something.
Oh, gosh. Oh, yeah.
I thought, talk about the beginning of ageism. These kids were like 6 years old, at oldest, as would be 6. They looked really young. And there they were, dressed in old baggy clothes. They had walkers and canes. And I'm thinking, give me a break.
Yep. Well, I've got news for you. Ageism can be instilled in a child as young as 3 years old. That's when it starts.
Wow.
So in preschool, that's why it's so incredibly important to have a lot of intergenerational activity between the very young and the very old. I'll tell you 2 things. One is there are some preschools that are attached to retirement communities, and that could be a very positive thing, not only for the older people who want to still have relationships with very young kids, but they could be the role models. If a child has a really positive or realistic, let's say realistic model of an older person at a very young age, those kids don't really grow up to be ageist, or they have that role model. And if they experience ageism, hear somebody else make fun of old people, something in their minds kind of says, no, that doesn't sound right to me. I'm a social gerontologist, but I became one in my 50s. I pivoted from being a writer and editor of educational materials for children, of all things, which I still do. So I have both ends of the aging spectrum in my life. But I was a caregiver to both my parents, and that's what made me want the challenges I faced and they faced, getting person-centered care, made me decide after they were gone, after they passed away, I want to study about gerontology. I want to study about aging, because we treat older adults very poorly in this society. Well, anyway, so I was in my 50s. I went back to graduate school, but I was sitting in a classes with 20-year-olds who are in college studying to be, or graduate school studying to be gerontologists. And I've always been fascinated. Why are young people interested in this stuff? Because if you asked me back in my 20s, I don't think I would have been that interested in it. It wouldn't have dawned on me. So I ask, whenever I encounter a young person who's into studying aging, I say, what is it for you? Why are you so attracted? Invariably, without ever any exception, I must have asked this about 50 times. No one has ever not said, well, I have a really good relationship with my grandparent, or an elderly next door neighbor was really helpful to me. Or I had a teacher, an old professor who I just really enjoyed. So they had those role models at an early age. So when we have this dress like 100-year-old day, we are really doing those kids a disservice. That is almost a kind of that's kind of indoctrination that I would even consider it a kind of child abuse, because we are disabusing them of the reality of what it's like to grow up. Other schools, in response to that, because they're getting a lot of kickback from us gerontologists saying, please stop this, they are doing things like put 100 pennies in a jar. So each day you put a penny in a jar, and at day 100, everyone looks at the jar full of pennies and they say, this is what 100 looks like. So we're getting a more realistic view of aging as a cumulative experience, because we do accumulate experience as we get older. That's the model you want. You don't want kids to think being bent over and I can't do this and I can't do that and I look like this and I look like that. So I'm glad you brought that up, because that is a practice that 100-year-old, just like 100-year-old person day, really needs to stop.
Yes, absolutely. I think it's also the case, just what you were saying, I think it's also the case that we also don't want children, and also all of us, to just see pictures and examples of amazing older people.
Right.
So men who run, 100-mile marathons, and women who are 80 and look like they're 30. I mean, that doesn't help either. I mean,
Right.
That is sort of just strengthening the youth culture in a way. I mean, it's just that. So this is what you want to try to be.
Right. And that's another good point that you're bringing up. And that is, when I said before, instead of talking about positive role models, talk about realistic role models, which are positive. I mean, realistically, yes, some of us I can't run a marathon. I'm 70, but you know what? I couldn't run one when I was 30 either. So let's really get real about what aging is about. Yeah, absolutely. But the ironic thing is we are living longer, and we're also living healthier longer, so that the 85-year-old who's running the marathon seems like a real exception to the rule. But, in times to come, that's going to start being more the rule.
Right.
So we're going to have to start, just really adjusting. And the way we adjust is let's just see an individual as an individual.
Right.
You're 85 and you can run a marathon. I'm 80, I'm 70. I can't run a marathon, but I can do something else. Right. So let's concentrate on what people as individuals can and can't do, and meet those needs and allow them to share what they can do at any age.
One of the things I was thinking about when we were talking about that horrible picture of kids looking like what we won't talk about that because it's so awful. I think it was Skye Bergman who talked about some of the children she talked to had no older people in their lives.
Right.
So as compared with those students in your gerontology class, these children don't have any positive role models.
Right.
And that's tough, because that's the way a lot of people are living their lives now in our incredibly mobile society.
And that's another great point you bring up. Exactly. We I guess since the Industrial Revolution, since the times of the 1850s, when jobs started shifting away from farmland into the cities and younger people left their farms and to get jobs in factories, we started ghettoizing age. We started separating the young and the old. And as you say, in today's very mobile society, there are kids who they may have grandparents, but their grandparents live 3,000 miles away and they never get to see them. Or maybe they do see them now with, Zoom and all of that. But that's why, again, it's so important to find ways to get older adults and young people together on a regular basis. Now, there's some programs like Experience Corps. AARP has the Experience Corps, where older adults volunteer to go into the schools and become like reading buddies for kids in the elementary schools. Yeah. That's a good way, So anytime we can actually mix the age groups, and we should, in our minds, we should have the same attitude that we would have toward race or gender or any other thing. If you're at a meeting, let's say a meeting that has nothing to do with age, and you look around the room and you see there are no old people in the room, you should say to yourself, I should say to myself, how come there are no old people here or young people? If there are no young people, just like if you're in a group that has nothing to do with gender and you see there aren't that many women there, or a group that has very few people of color, we should be sensitized to how come there aren't more people, there isn't more diversity in this experience, which calls for diversity. Now, I'm not saying that teen clubs should invite 90-year-olds into their clubs, or retirement groups that go on hikes should have teenagers with them. There are affinity groups that have their own preferences. But when it's something that has nothing to do with the affinity, with the age, we should have it more diverse.
And I think, Jeanette, I don't know about this, but I'm going to start paying attention. I think that we're probably at this point in time more sensitive to groups where there are no people of color or there are no women, for example, than we are of there are no older people here or there are no younger people here.
That's right.
That is not on our radar yet.
Mm-hmm. Yet. Right, exactly. And ironically, I mean, the irony of all ironies is that ageism is the only ism we are all vulnerable to.
Right.
Not all of us are vulnerable to sexism or racism or homophobia or ableism, but we're all getting older.
That's right.
So
I said that to somebody not very long ago, and he really was taken aback. I said, you're going to experience ageism if things don't change. You don't have to worry about sexism. You don't have to worry because you're not going to be a woman. I mean, you could be, but at this point in your life, you're probably not going to be. Mm-hmm. You don't have to worry about that. You don't have to worry about racism because you're a white male. You do have to think about ageism because, and he was just sort of, oh, I hadn't actually thought about that.
Well, ironically, the first time most white men experience ageism is in the workplace when they're either denied, they're not hired, or they're denied a promotion, or they're asked to retire early. Or they feel like they're being forced to retire early, or people don't consult them during meetings, or they don't get the same training as younger employees do. That's the first time they tend to experience it. But for us women, I mean, this whole idea of gendered ageism, we experience it with the first wrinkle or the first gray hair.
So talk about that, Jeanette. Talk about because I am interested in gendered ageism. I mean, I don't like any ageism, but I am particularly interested in gendered ageism. I think you are too.
Yeah.
So talk about how does ageism impact women different from men? Differently from men, or is it the same, or how do you see it?
Ageism, which is prejudice against anyone because of their age, that by that definition alone, it impacts people just in that basic way. But for us women, it impacts us differently because the social expectations of women have always been different than the social expectations for men. So we are judged more immediately on our appearance. So appearance is a big factor in how society sees our value. So we have to be, young, and we have to be beautiful. And, how many of us qualify on, one or both of those factors? And whereas men, don't have that pressure. Think of the typical, and it still goes on today, think of the typical two-person desk of a news report. You have the older gentleman with maybe a little bit of gray hair over the ears, or, the temples. And then you have the young 20-something female. And that seems to be the combination. And I think that picture says it all as to how ageism impacts women differently. Then because of that, our lives are affected very seriously in terms of the fact that we still don't earn as much as men do. Yeah. I think now, I don't know what the figure is, 88 cents on the dollar, maybe. So what that means is then our Social Security is going to be less because we haven't put in as much. And then many of us, I should say, it's getting less and less, which is a good thing, are expected to stay home and take care of kids, be the primary caregivers. So many women have either left the job market or never entered the job market because they were seen as the ones who were responsible for taking care of the kids. So that alone also affects how much we earn through life. Women are still the majority of caregivers, family caregivers in our society, although more and more men are assuming that role. So that intersectionality of gender and ageism And then again, we talk to intersectionality, this intersectionality with ableism as well. How physically fit are we to be able to then perform the roles that society has demanded of us? And how, when we're in society, are there people stepping up to share those roles with us? Most of the caregiving, the nurturing roles of society traditionally been relegated to women. Nursing, teaching, and all of that, social work. It has changed over the years, but these are still primarily female dominated occupations. And because women were considered less, and these occupations are considered less, so they're not paid as well. So you have, again, not only are women, we're earning less, but the types of jobs are also less salaried than if we were lawyers or doctors or anything else. So that's how ageism affects women. More gendered ageism is a real determinant of how well we age in our later years.
You have recently, at least I think it's recently, written about feeling invisible as you get older. Mm-hmm. And I find that I found what you said fascinating about, I think I'm remembering this correctly, that we're not invisible to ourselves.
Right.
Would you talk about that? I find that fascinating, and especially in terms of the work that Becca Levy's doing.
Well, what I meant by we're not invisible to ourselves is the fact that we are well aware that we are aging, that we are older people. And I'm saying we, as I said, I'm 70. So I'm talking about all, people who, where we determine that we are an old person is an individual for each of us, because age is fluid, and the concept of old is fluid. By the way, at this point, I should mention that there was a study done in 2015 where I think it was about 100 people from ages 5 to 75 were asked, how old is an old person? The 5-year-olds on average, ready for this? The 5-year-olds on average said 13. 13-year-old was an old person.
I love it.
The 13-year-olds on average said a 30-year-old was old. A 30-year-old on average said 50. And then people above the age of 50 seem to want to add 15 years to whatever age they were. So the good news is that aging is a fluid concept. In our minds, we all have different ideas of when is an old person. But the bad news is no matter how old you are, somebody already thinks you're old. So deal with it, in whatever way. So I've just recently, I would say in the last couple of years, I started to actually accept calling myself an old person. I used to say I'm an older adult. Now I say I'm an old person, and I'm okay with that. So that invisibility about being old is, I can't feel invisible to myself as an old person. I know I'm old. I know every morning when I wake up and my shoulders hurt me and my knees hurt and my eyesight is going and my hearing is not as great. So I know that stuff. But I also equally know I'm an old person because I know that my brain is far more superior to the brain I had when I was 30 years old. Yeah. And so I know the ways in which I've changed. And that's what I mean about in terms of invisibility. We older adults, we know that who we are. We just have to get society to see us in the first place. And then secondly, to see us in the real ways we should be seen, and not just people in deterioration and decline.
Right.
But the more complex people we are.
I think it's fascinating that I run into all the time. I run into people saying, why don't you use a word other than older women? And I say, because we are older.
What would they prefer you to say?
Wiser. I say, I know a lot of older women who aren't particularly wise.
Right.
And I know a lot of young women who are really wise. And
right.
I think part of the problem is how we feel about the word. So we need to use it and own it and say, I'm an older woman. Look at me.
Right. Well, it's interesting when people want to equate older people with wisdom as opposed to nobody else is wise except old people. That to me is the equivalent of the 85-year-old who's running the marathon.
Yes.
You know, the
Yeah.
super ager, the one who's really good at stuff. Now, again, yes, there are many old people who I would not consider to be wise. There are many young people who are wise. But if anyone is familiar with Erik Erikson's work about the stages of personality development in humans, what he talked about in the later stages of life is we get a kind of wisdom that's different from a teenage wisdom or a 20-year-old's wisdom or a 30-year-old's wisdom. There's certain brain skills that we get as we grow older only because we're growing older. For example, my favorite thing to talk about is, we have a left and a right hemisphere to our brain. But actually, those hemispheres don't even touch, except in the middle part, there's a bridge of tissue called the corpus callosum. Now, we're born with that little bridge of tissue that connects the two hemispheres. But that doesn't fully mature and get thicker and thicker and thicker until we're in our 50s. That's when it gets to be the thickest it is. And when it has fully matured, we tend to use our left and right hemispheres simultaneously better whenever we do a task. Young people's brains, when they're doing a task, of course, they use both sides of their brain simultaneously, but they tend to favor one side or another in doing a particular task. When we get older, our whole brain starts to work. And as Gene Cohen, famous gerontologist, geriatrician Gene Cohen said, it's as if we go from two-wheel drive to all-wheel drive. Our brains kick in. And so as we get older, we're able to perceive things from multiple perspectives. We empathize better. We can put ourselves in someone else's shoes because we've had more life experiences, and our brains have allowed us to have that ability to see problems in more the complexity. So things aren't as black and white as when we were younger. The answers don't come as quickly to us because we tend to want to deliberate and say, well, maybe it's not just quite the case. It's not as clear cut as you think it is. So that's how we mature as we get older. And I think those brain skills that we get as we get older are just so wonderful to anticipate. And that's what I would hope people of any age would start to anticipate getting older instead of dreading it. Can you imagine a little kid saying to a grandparent, Grandma, Grandpa, I can't wait to have a brain like yours when I grow up. That's the society I'm working for.
Yes, I agree. So, Jeanette, of all the things you've done so many wonderful things. What are the 3 things you're proudest of?
Well, I think the thing I am proudest of in my life has been to be a long-term caregiver for both my parents. It was such a hard struggle. It was over a decade of really serious, intense struggle to get them to get their needs met in the way they wanted their needs to be met. So person-centered care as opposed to institutional care, what providers thought we needed versus what my parents wanted and what they felt they needed. So I remember even thinking during those times of, years of sleep deprivation and years of very high stress, I thought to myself, if I never do anything else in this life, I've done this. And that to me has meant a lot to me. So I think being a caregiver has been one of the most important things I've ever done and probably will ever do. But also, I feel I'm proud of being a catalyst for other people. I love connecting people to other people or to other ideas or to books and or places or whatever. I love kind of lighting a spark and then stepping back and watching it happen. I've been a teacher, a community educator, a teacher all my life. And my favorite moments in the classroom is when I literally disappear, when I've set the atmosphere and I give them whatever the situation is, and then they start working on it together. And I'm just stepping back and watching the sparks fly. That's a real joy in my life, is to be a catalyst. I don't consider myself a teacher. I consider myself a facilitator. And I guess the other thing I'm proudest of is being as creative as I've been. I've done lots of different things in a creative way. I've written poetry and essays. I've done paintings. I've made homemade gifts for people. I like to approach things creatively. Creativity to me is like it's the battery of my life. It's the spark, the engine of my life is to be creative. So those would be my 3 things.
Oh, that's wonderful. That's wonderful. Thank you. So we've come to the end of our time today, and I really want to thank all of you for being here. Please join us again. You can find out about Prime Spark podcasts on every major outlet. You can find out more about Prime Spark at www.primesparkwomen.com. Thank you so much to my guest, Jeanette Leardi. Where can people find you, Jeanette, if they're wanting to find you?
Well, my website is JeanetteLeardi.com. So let me spell that JeanetteLeardi.com. And on my website, you'll see my Ageful Living blog under the Views and News tab. And I'm also on Twitter and I'm also on LinkedIn. So just Google my name and you'll find me.
That is absolutely true, because just before we came on, I Googled Jeanette's name and all sorts of things came up. So it's JeanetteLeardi, and you can find her easily online. So thank you for being with us. Take care. Spread tolerance and love. Bye-bye.
Thank you for joining us on Prime Spark. With each episode, Sarah Hart brings you conversations that inspire, celebrate, and empower women over 55. If you would like to listen to or download other episodes about remarkable, experienced women, go to ewnpodcastnetwork.com. This podcast is also available at Spotify, Apple Podcast, and most other major podcast sites. The second women's revolution is here, and we hope that you use the insights you've gained here to fuel the spark that will ignite your way forward, illuminate your path, and reflect your gifts in the world.
Have you ever asked yourself this question? Why is it so hard to make a buck? I know I have. Hi, I'm Sandra Yancey, founder and CEO of eWomen Network. What I have discovered after going from the brink of bankruptcy to running a multi-million-dollar award-winning business is this: you can't build a million-dollar dream hanging around minimum wage mindsets. My mission is 1 million women entrepreneurs generating $1 million in annual revenue. So here's what I've done. I've created the mother of all entrepreneur success programs that you can access online on your time. It's called Monetize Me Now. It's a 7-module online course that is 100% my success formula, covering mindset, mission, management, motivation, marketing, and measure. Come on, take my hand and I'll show you the way to learn to earn flowing revenue for your business. Visit monetizemenow.com for details. Calling all speakers, eWomen Network has speaking engagements all over North America that must be filled. Are you a gifted messenger, author, expert, or successful entrepreneur that can help women entrepreneurs grow their businesses? Our mission is to help 1 million fulfilled women each achieve $1 million in annual revenue. If you're a speaker that can help women prosper, go to eWomenNetwork.com and sign up as a pro member of our Speakers Network. That's eWomenNetwork.com. Thanks for listening. This is the EWN Podcast Network.